Hey everyone, it's Brandon Lee, host of the episode Escaping Rock Bottom, the podcast. Man, I'm telling you, I got a real special guest here with us today. His name is Chris Taylor. You may have actually know the name very well. It's been very publicized here in the Arizona media and the Arizona press. Chris Taylor was running for Congress in 2020, ended up suffering a relapse. And so he's here with us today because he has a message of experience, strength, and hope. And his story is so inspiring, and I know it's a message so many people, especially addicts out there who are struggling right now, need to hear Chris's message. So Chris is here. Chris, man, thanks for being here. I'm glad to have you on the podcast. We're going to get into a lot of that stuff about you maybe running for politics and what ended up leading to that relapse. But before we begin there, take me back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in a small community south of Phoenix, 3 hours south of Phoenix. It's called Safford, Arizona. It's a small town. My family's been there actually for 7 generations. My ancestors kind of were part of the group that settled that area. So I have lots of, my family's been there for a long time.
Wow. Okay. So brothers and sisters?
Yeah. So I have 2 brothers, an older brother and a younger brother.
And your parents?
And my parents, they're divorced now, but growing up, we lived in a great environment, a great home life, loving parents, religious household. But both of my parents, they had kind of struggled with substance use in their younger years. And so we were always taught compassion and empathy and not judging people and understanding the human condition. And also, they, from an early age, taught my brothers and I about the dangers of substance use and addiction and the genetic predisposition that probably runs in our family. And so, that was something that I was aware of. And as a young kid going to high school, I was completely against all of that. I was a standout athlete and I had goals. I actually was recruited to play basketball at the college level. And so, I knew that I wanted what I wanted to accomplish. And so when people started to, experiment with drugs and alcohol, I remember losing friends just because I was like, I don't want to do that.
No, that's because when you were a child, you said that your parents both struggled at times in their own lives with some sort of an addiction, right? Mm-hmm. Do you remember that as a child? Like, did you see mom or dad drunk and behave in, kind of a reckless way?
No, not at all. My parents got completely sober when I was born.
Okay.
And so
you actually never witnessed
I never witnessed it. My dad was a Vietnam veteran and he had struggled with a rough transition, just like a lot of Vietnam veterans and all veterans do. And so he had some substance use issues and some post-traumatic stress issues. My mom, she struggled with mostly, marijuana and pills and stuff like that. But my mom actually got sober when I was 1 year. I was a baby.
Okay,
so I never knew.
You always saw your parents as sober. Mm-hmm. Okay. So. All right, so you start growing up, as a kid. When did you start experimenting with drugs or alcohol? What age were you?
So, like I said, I was playing football, and I was 15 years old. I was standout on the football and basketball teams. I was brought up to varsity as a sophomore. I was one particular day or game. I was returning a kickoff, and I got face masked and spun around and speared in the back. It was the most excruciating pain that I ever felt. I wasn't paralyzed or anything, but it ruptured a disc in my back. And so like the shock went down my leg and I couldn't move because it was so excruciating. And so they thought that maybe I had like a internal, a damaged spleen or something like that. So they rushed me to the hospital and I remember them cutting my pads off. I actually passed out from the pain on the way to the hospital. Like that's how bad it was. And so I remember the nurse saying, there's going to be a little prick on the top of your hand. And I was just, okay. And within, instantly I went from the worst excruciating pain to the most euphoric, comforting feeling I'd ever felt.
Do you know what they gave you?
They gave me morphine.
Okay.
And so, I was in the hospital for about a week, and I was 15, and like I said, and had never done drugs or alcohol. I was completely against it. But I remember when that pain medication would wear off, I would be obsessing about when the nurse was going to come and give it to me again, and then I got better. I recovered. Didn't think about it again until about 8 months later. I was out after a Friday night, a hangout in a small town. Was Sonic Drive-In was where everybody went to find out where to go. And I was always the kid that kind of, I was not a good kid at all. I mean, I was rough around the edges. I was a troublemaker, but I was always like the designated driver, or I would go to parties and flirt with the girls and stuff. But I my parents just wouldn't tolerate it. And plus, I had goals, and I didn't want to do that until one day. This older kid had pulled up into the Sonic Drive-In, and I remember like 20 kids rushing to his truck, and I was like, "What is that about? Like, he's not that popular, And someone said, "Well, he's selling OxyContin," and I was like, "What's that?" And someone explained to me that it's like morphine, and that something clicked in my mind, like, "Oh wow, I could maybe try that," because I remembered how it made me feel in the hospital.
Oy vey. I tell people all the time, Chris, when I did that investigative piece about 3 years ago here in Arizona on a needle exchange program called Shot in the Dark, and was able to follow them, throughout the whole night to really get an understanding of who a heroin addict is. Because I knew that there was a stigma out there. And my gut instinct told me that the public has a totally wrong perception of who a heroin addict is. So I really wanted to do the story. When I was out at this needle exchange program, about 100 people were in line. I spoke to every single one of them. Every one of them. Some went on camera, some off, because I just wanted some background. Did you know 100% out of 100, every single one of them, I asked them this question: how on earth did you end up here in the East Valley in a vacant parking lot in line to get a tourniquet, a cooking plate, Narcan, and needles? Every single one of them said, "Brandon, it all started with a prescription of pain pills." Every single one of them. So when you hear people out there saying marijuana is the gateway drug to it all, marijuana, it's not. Right. Opiates and pain pills are the gateway to heroin. And you had that introduction, that euphoric feeling. As somebody who has a disease and predisposed, right? You get that feeling, your body remembers that high. So I'm not surprised that the moment you had a chance to try OxyContin, you did.
Yeah.
What was it like?
It was the same exact feeling again. And at that point, I had like I said, I had a great childhood. I had no trauma. I lived in a loving home. And so, but I had those injuries, and because I had put so much stock in my future to get my college paid for, to play basketball or football, I could not afford to lose my starting position. I broke my ankle the first scrimmage of my senior year, and so I started to use that OxyContin as a way to keep my position so that I could go to college. And so it was still like, okay, I know this is wrong, but like this, my whole future is riding on this, and I have to do it. And then into my senior year, obviously with opioids, your tolerance grows. So it started to be more of a dependency thing. And then tragedy struck about a month before graduation. My grandmother, who was very young at the time, when I was 17, I thought she was old, but she was in her 60s. And she got diagnosed with a terminal illness. Within a couple of months, she was dead. And she was kind of the glue that held our family together, our extended family together. And a week after that, on my 18th birthday, I was blowing out the candles on my 18th birthday cake, and I get a call from a friend who said, "Did you hear about Carrie and Matt?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, they're dead, and they were killed in a car accident." And I immediately felt guilt because I was supposed to be there with them that night. They were my friends. They were kind of wild. They would drink and stuff, and I would always kind of be the designated driver. I would always keep them out of trouble. And they were killed. They were drunk and they were driving, and they were killed a month before graduation. And so with all that happening, with my grandma had just passed away.
That's a traumatic event, by the way.
And so I never knew that was even a trauma that I had, because after I came home from combat, and we'll probably get into that later, like that was my trauma. I was in extensive combat action, and I had lost lots of friends and lots of close calls. But that was back when I was 17, 18 years old, is when I first knew that, okay, I was using the oxycodone to mask my physical pain. But when those tragedies struck within a couple of weeks together, and then just the stress of I'm graduating, I had signed a letter of intent to play basketball in a college in Iowa. I'm scared. I'm from a small town in Arizona. I don't know anybody. I'm dealing with all this loss and this grief and this survivor's guilt. And so I realized that OxyContin could mask my emotional pain, and I used it to numb those feelings away. And when I graduated and I didn't have that sports and that kind of things that I needed to stay on the straight and narrow for, I spiraled down pretty quick, to the point where I had to rescind my letter of intent to play basketball, and I made up a story that my injuries were too great and I just couldn't go. And so for the next year, I kind of just floundered around. My addiction had spiraled. My tolerance had grown. I still hadn't, heroin wasn't even around back then. It was still a major pill epidemic. And then one of my close friends that I had also graduated with was killed in action in Iraq. And it was right around the time of the surge in Iraq, where all of these people that I knew, because a lot of the small town people are who go and serve in those wars. And so I looked at myself in the mirror and said, my country needs me right now. And what am I doing? My friend is dying in combat. And so I got my act together, got clean, got sober, and enlisted in the Army.
Okay, so before we get into your experience in the Army, I just want to kind of piggyback off of that, because it's really important that people know this. When I was in New York City in 2001, I was going to school in New York. I was working part-time at the Today Show and was living down in Wall Street, that area. I was on my way to work that morning on 9/11 on the subway when those towers were hit. The subway came to a stop. We had to break out of the subway car, go up the sewer system, up to the top, and get out. And I saw things on that day that nobody should ever see. And I saw death, but I compartmentalized it. And the adrenaline was pumping. And I was working in news. And we don't allow ourselves to feel anything. We just go into news mode, ice in our veins. Mm-hmm. What I didn't realize until 17 years later, after 9/11, when I told my therapist I've never been back to New York City, to Ground Zero, I couldn't go back. And I love New York City, but I couldn't go back. And I would call out sick on 9/11 at work throughout my entire career, because I could not see the video of the planes hitting the Twin Towers without bringing all of that stuff. But what I had to realize from my therapist was, Brandon, that was such a traumatic event. That was untreated trauma that you never worked through.
Right.
So it's no wonder, in addition to being molested as a child, right? Just layers of repeated traumas.
Right.
But even as an adult, I did not work through that trauma. And what did I do? I really started to numb myself with ecstasy and meth and GHB just to not live in reality. Mm-hmm. But I didn't even realize that's what I was doing at the time, right? Because we go into survival mode.
Right.
So you decide to join the Army, the military. Mm-hmm. What branch did you serve?
The Army.
In the Army. Yep. Okay, so you go to combat. And what role did you play in the Army?
So because I was a really good athlete, I tested really high on my aptitude tests for intelligence and stuff. And my dad had been a Green Beret in the Army, so I knew that I wanted to do something in the special operations community. And so I researched a job. It's called psychological warfare specialist. And so what they do is they work in very small autonomous teams that go into an area, a austere environment, and operate like what I did in Afghanistan was we would embed into local small villages, and conduct psychological warfare and other unconventional warfare with other special operators, with the Green Berets and with Navy SEALs and stuff like that. And so my job specifically was to persuade and influence the local populace or the enemy. We did lots of military deception. I ran a covert radio station, putting out messaging. I also handled some Taliban sources, some confidential informants that would report to me on enemy activity. And so it was a really awesome job, very high paced, but being in those environments, being completely cut off from the conventional army, operating covertly in a Taliban safe haven. There was just a lot of fighting, a lot of death, a lot of close calls, a lot of friends that were killed right next to me. My interpreter was shot right in front of me. Just a lot of things happening. But during that time period, it was right in 2009, 2010 in Afghanistan. That was the height of that war. And with special operations, you're constantly deploying, coming back for a couple months, deploying right back. And so it felt like I was on a bullet train for that period of time. I had just compounded all of this trauma on top of everything. Not to mention, I was still hadn't processed the trauma that I had experienced in high school and didn't even know that it was trauma. And so, I by the grace of God, I kept it together and was sober. I would, because I was constantly just doing things where I couldn't be drunk or high. I was operating at such a high level. And so then I was, my second combat tour, I had injured my back in a combat situation where my interpreter was shot. I had to carry him to safety, and the sheer weight of his body and his body armor, my back, the same area where I injured it in football had re-ruptured that disc. And so the Army prescribed me oxycodone. And so I had a decision to make, because my enlistment was coming up. I had either had to re-enlist, and they were going to send me right back to a third tour in as many years, to Afghanistan, or I could not re-enlist and transition back to civilian life. And so my dad, he had the times that he saw me, he had identified what was happening, because he knew the signs of post-traumatic stress. He knew the signs of self-medicating. And so he said, let's get you home. Let's get you some help. And he picked me up at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. We drove all the way home in a straight shot, 24 hours. We didn't stop. Went back to Arizona. And that Monday, that was a Friday, that Monday, I was at the Phoenix VA with a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress already at Fort Bragg. And I said, I need to see somebody here. And lo and behold, I got stuck on the scandalous secret waiting list at the Phoenix VA. And so it took 9 months before I could even see a mental health provider.
Chris, I didn't even know that part of your story. Did you know that, Dr. Foote, I broke that story in 2014 about that secret wait list. Mm-hmm. And then Anderson Cooper and everybody kind of took off from there. But the doctor over at the VA is the one who gave me. I went over to his house in PV, and he told me, he goes, this is the list. This is the truth of what's happening. And for people who don't know, there was a secret waitlist scandal that really broke open in April of 2014. Mm-hmm. And during that time period, what would happen is that all these veterans were trying to see their doctors, and they were supposed to be seen within 30 days of making that appointment. And some people, they couldn't get them in. And so they took them off the wait list, put them on a secret wait list, so that the federal government in Washington, D.C. would see that they were making all their appointments on time, when really veterans were dying left and right because they couldn't see a doctor. Yeah. And hopefully the VA is still trying to clean up that mess to get the veterans the health care they freaking deserve. Is that when you got sober the first time?
So yeah, so during that 9-month period, I was so lost. I mean, at this point I was only 25, and I had just experienced 2 combat tours in the special operations community, 18 months of direct extensive combat. I came home and tried to get seen I actually had got an appointment within 6 months. I went to that appointment with the documentation that said, this is me, this is my appointment. And they said, we have no record of you having an appointment. Come back in 3 months. So then during that time, I had, the Army had sent me home with a week supply of my medication, which was oxycodone. And I couldn't see a doctor. So I was withdrawing. So what did I do? I knew some friends from high school, and I said, hey, until I can go see a doctor and get this taken care of, I need to buy some pills. And I did that. And that same week, out of the blue, I get a phone call from a friend that I had grown up with, a young lady I had grown up with. I hadn't seen her in years. She, out of the blue, said, hey, I heard you're back in town. Do you know where to get any pills? I'm hurting, and I know you know what that feels like. Can you help me? I said, I don't want to contribute to anybody's addiction, but she said, well, I'll buy you a free one if you can find some for me. I was basically homeless, living at my parents', had no job, couldn't get seen at the doctor's office, and so I said, sure, I'm gonna go get pills anyway. And I didn't think anything of it until after I had finally gotten some help, got sober. About 9 months later, when I finally did get into the VA, I was actually called out of the blue from a regional representative at the VA saying, hey, you put in a claim for post-traumatic stress. Can you come down to the regional office tomorrow and sign a couple papers and your claim is going to go through? I said, yeah, absolutely. I was so excited because I was going to get some back pay, some little bit of disability so that I had been sober for 9 months, 10 months at that point. I was starting to go to school with my GI Bill. And I was living on my brother's couch, and I wanted to, I just felt bad about myself. Like, here I am, I have all these skills, I have all this experience. I finally got on the path that I need to be on. And so I'm going to get a little bit of help from the government. And I go in and I walk back, and they say, right when I walk in that regional office building, this guy says, are you Chris Taylor? And I said, yeah. That's kind of weird that you recognize me from walking in. I thought. He pulls me back to this room, and the door closes behind me, and 5 undercover police officers tackle me to the ground. And they're with the Maricopa County Fugitive Task Force. And 9 months earlier, when that girl called me out of the blue, well, apparently she was working as a confidential informant for the Safford police, and they had got me on sale of narcotic drugs. And the VA was going to put my claim through, but they can't pay a fugitive. And so they thought, I had a $50,000 cash only bond that, like I said, my family has lots of standing in the community. My grandfather was the fire chief for 30 years. The Safford police knew who I was, knew my parents. If I had a warrant, they could have just called and said, hey, you have a warrant, come take care of it. Instead, they didn't do that. And I get tackled to the ground at the VA and get thrown in jail, $50,000 cash only bond. And they have me on the sale of a narcotic drug. I'm facing multiple class 2 felonies. They charge me with all these things. Thankfully, the judge saw it for what it was and said, this is ridiculous. And I got 3 years of probation, got off in 18 months for good behavior, got my life back on track, got involved in the community. I was an outspoken advocate about what happened to me because they do that to lots of people. They instead of going after actual drug dealers, they want to appease the community by saying, look at who we've arrested. And what they did to me was totally wrong, but they do it to lots of people. And so that's what kind of spurred me to get involved and run for city council. And I started a nonprofit in that community to help people suffering from addiction because we have zero resources there. And that's what I did. I won election at 30 years old, the youngest city council member to be elected in Safford. I was doing lots of meaningful reforms with that platform I had, and the police hated that. They saw me as a loser, drug addict, and here I am, lecturing them from the city council that this is wrong. We're going to go after actual drug dealers and not go after people like me or people who are just suffering. And I took that and then, got involved in politics. And then I was asked to run for Congress.
So you you were on the city council. We're going to fast forward here. You were on the city council. You end up deciding to run for Congress when?
May of 2019. So I got in really early for the 2020 cycle.
So you were if you had finished the race, you would have been up in this last recent election, 2020, November 3rd or 4th. Yeah. And so you're running, you're campaigning. John McCain passes away, right? And you're out there, you're knocking on doors as a Republican. You're already a city councilman. Now you're running for Congress. And what was that experience like for you?
I mean, for the most part, it was great because, I had gained so much support from so many people because, I was able to, I was a really good public servant. I was responsive to the citizens. I was open and honest. When I ran for city council, I talked openly about my struggles with addiction and post-traumatic stress, and and with what I was doing with my nonprofit, I was helping people, and so people from all sides, the Republican side, the Democrat side, the independents, I had overwhelming support, and what I politically wise, I hate the tribalism that's happening, the hyperpartisanship, the distrust of each other, everything. I don't want to get involved in how horrible our politics are. But part of my motivation to run was to restore the soul of the Republican Party. Because I looked up to people like John McCain, Mitt Romney, Jeff Flake, who could stand up for their personal beliefs and still, support conservative ideals and less government, lower taxes, things like that. But while standing up to more of the, immoral behavior and rhetoric and hatefulness that we see with the Republican Party.
Eventually, you got to a point on the campaign trail where you felt helpless and hopeless.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, because that ended up in that moment is what led to that relapse.
Yeah. So after, I had felt like it would be okay to equivocate on some things, to stay silent on some things, because I knew that my motives to run were pure, and that I was on the Republican side was going to fight for the things that I believe in, and restore some sanity and morality to the party. And what I encountered on the campaign trail, the behind the scenes campaign trail, the rampant racism, the xenophobia, just the hatefulness, and me staying quiet because I couldn't win a Republican primary if I said even one cross word or criticism of the president. And so what I did was I found some policies that I could support, and I highlighted my support for those, and I stayed quiet on some of the other things that just ate me up. And little by little, it felt like I was compromising my conscience, because people would ask me, because of my combat experience, they said that you remind us of a young John McCain, and a young Jeff Flake. Are you going to be a traitorous person to your country like them? And just things like that. And it would just ate me up inside. Like, I wanted to say, yes, I'm going to be exactly like them. I'm going to be an independent thinker. I'm not going to blindly follow anybody. I'm gonna stand up for what's in the best interest of the country, not for a party. But I couldn't say that, and so little by little it ate at me. But during that time as well, I was a firefighter, and to prove to myself that the post-traumatic stress, and being a combat veteran, I didn't want to be weak. And so as a firefighter, I put myself in positions where I was on the first truck on all of the most traumatic calls. I pulled out a burning body of a 21-year-old girl that was 7 months pregnant, and another fatality a week later of an 18-year-old girl. It triggered something in me that I had a resurgence of my post-traumatic stress that I had suppressed from the combat experiences. And then also, I know we don't have a lot of time here, but my wife and I were dealing with infertility issues after we had our daughter was born, it was really hard to have another baby. And so we went down that whole road with infertility, in vitro fertilization. We finally, after years of struggling with that struggle and all the other traumas that I had kept suppressing, and then the fire department trauma, my wife had been pregnant with twins, and she had a perfect pregnancy all the way up until about 8 months. And we lost Connor, our baby, one of our twin sons. And, it was so, all of those things put together, and then the compromise in my conscience exacerbated it. It wasn't the cause, but exacerbated it.
Yeah. And you end up relapsing in a pretty traumatic way.
Yeah.
And you ended up shooting heroin in your bathroom and overdosing.
Yeah.
And your wife ended up finding you essentially on the bathroom floor convulsing.
Yeah.
And we don't have to go into those details because it was a relapse. And what I want to use this moment to explain to people, because everything you just listed, right? The loss of a child, the hopelessness, essentially you felt shame by not speaking out in your authenticity about what you really wanted to say. So really what that was just a layer of shame that you carried that burden.
Yeah.
And what I tell people too is that when you hit that breaking point as an addict, right? And you go to relapse, nobody wakes up one day healthy in their mind, sane in their mind, and says, you know what, I think today's going to be a good day to relapse. I think today's a good day. I'm going to throw my career away. I'm going to throw my family away, and I'm just going to shoot some heroin so I can feel good.
Yeah.
Okay, it does not work that way.
Yeah.
So what I tell people is that when you see or hear about somebody who relapse, understand this, that what it took for them to get to that spot, their brain was hijacked. Your brain, you were not thinking clearly, right? Your brain is hijacked with all the traumas, the untreated traumas that suddenly surface. And it was that one triggering event, right? It was like a triggering event is that all that it takes. And you relapsed. What did that do? How rough was that for you and your family in the depths of that relapse? And how long were you out?
So, I had reached 7 years of sobriety when all of that perfect storm, I call it, of all those factors came together in a perfect storm of a weak moment. And you're right. I didn't, looking back on it and going through therapy and processing all of it, it was almost as if it was just autopilot. I didn't ever make a conscious decision that I'm going to throw away everything that I have. My family. I had a beautiful 1-year-old son, a 4-year-old daughter, an amazing wife, a rising political career. There was a clear path to being a member of the U.S. House of Representatives at 33, a firefighter, a community pillar to helping my community. I didn't just wake up and say, I'd rather just get high today.
Yeah.
It didn't happen. And so, yes, I had a very weak moment. I relapsed. And then, because of the stigma and everything that I had writing, not only the congressional race, but who I was in the community. Because with my nonprofit, I still have people that are always, people that you would never think of that suffer in silence with addiction, that can't come out and say, to let anyone know that they're dealing with it, even their family. But they confide in me and they find hope in me. And so I'm sitting there thinking, everything in me wants to say, okay, I know where to go. I can go to the VA, check myself in. I didn't even have to end my congressional race. I could have just stepped off. It was still early enough that I could just get some help. But I knew that I couldn't do that because of the stigma. And so I tried to get the train back on the tracks.
Which, you know what, at the end of the day, Chris, right? I mean, family's more important than everything. Your children are more important than everything, right? Your wife and everything is. But you're right. And that's the reason why I've done this podcast. It's the reason why I wrote my book. It's the reason why I've been so public. And I always want to take an opportunity to say how grateful I am to Meredith Corporation, the company that I work for at CBS 5 and 3 TV, because they support me 100%. They supported me on my book tour. They support this podcast. They support everything about me. And it's those kind of employers that are helping to end the stigma, allowing me to have the platform that I have to speak so openly about, my trauma and what led me down that path. And we're making some ground because the comments that I get from viewers is that they don't see me as an addict, right? They see me as somebody out there trying to just help somebody else through their struggles. But the stigma does exist. And you really had no choice but to kind of drop out of that race because of the stigma that we're trying to fight back against. That being said, you were running against Tom O'Halloran, a Democrat. And there was a level of compassion from your opponent in that race. You were still in the primary phase, but he had reached out to you, and a simple message was what?
I'm impressed with everything that you've done and the way that you've conducted yourself in your race. We were worried about you. We knew that you would win the primary, I just want to help you. And I didn't get any of those type of calls from any Republicans. But to go back just really quick, that night, it came to a head when I had got to the point where I said, I just can't do this. I had my last dose of heroin. I used it and I overdosed. And the last thought in my head was, I knew that I was overdosing, and I tried to stay conscious, and I fell back, and I knew the last thing in my head was that I'm dying or dead, and I'm abandoning my family. And so my wife kicked the door in, gave me CPR, saved my life. And those same police officers that were holding that grudge from me being an advocate for people who suffer from addiction, the paramedic came in and kicked my door in, and tackled me. And in that hypoxic state, I was unconscious. My wife had revived me, but I wasn't. I was still completely blacked out. Apparently, I defended myself, and then 4 months later, I get charges for aggravated assault, and here I am again with felony charges for something so unwarranted, and thankfully, a Maricopa County judge, because the judge in Graham County had to recuse himself, and she saw it for what it was and said, this is ridiculous.
And he wasn't even in a conscious state of mind.
No, and I didn't assault anyone. But the police report was written in a sensational way. The media, the local media, picked it up as not only am I a horrible drug addict, but now I'm
a violent
combat veteran that's tried to assault a paramedic. And the stupid thing is, he was a colleague of mine from the fire department. He's my friend, and it was just so stupid. But thankfully the judge saw it that way, and I'm serving a year of probation. I had to take a plea agreement because of that criminal history from prior. I couldn't put my family in jeopardy to fight that charge, and have a jury that hates drug addicts and put me in jail. And then the prosecutor tried to lobby for 6 months in jail, and the Maricopa County judge, she harshly rebuked him. It was glorious in the sentencing phase. She sentenced me to a year of probation, which I just hit 10 months of sobriety. I'm on the right path.
Congratulations.
I know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to stop speaking about the horrible things that happen in our criminal justice system. Not only the racial disparities, but the things that people don't think about, like the two things that happened to me. And I'm not a victim. I'm not saying that, but there's no way that I should have felonies on my record.
Well, it's the way that society treats drug addicts. I'm like, drug addicts, for the most part, right? You're either predisposed to the disease, and any triggering event can cause you to go down that road, or trauma. Untreated trauma will always cause somebody to numb themselves. It's untreated. You're going to feel uncomfortable, and the only way to not feel uncomfortable is to medicate, to self-medicate, whether it's through food or gambling or alcohol or or drugs. And so, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot of us. It's going to take a lot of us to speak out, to say that we have struggled with drugs and alcohol. Judge me by the man I am today, and not by who I was. What I will also say is that I'm a huge supporter of the 12-step programs. It helped me build that foundation. But one thing I tell to everybody who's relapsed is, you had 7 years prior. You did not lose those 7 years. I always ask people, what's the total amount of sobriety you have in your life? The total amount of experience of sobriety you have, not continuous.
Right.
Because just like you make it to your third year in your master's program, and a class gets really hard. You're distracted by life events and you fail that class. The school and the university doesn't tell you need to start over at class 1 and 01, and restart your master's program. No, because you don't lose all of that knowledge. You don't lose that experience. Right. Okay. And as a matter of fact, I would suffice to say that some people who have relapsed is a lesson that they needed to learn in order to humble themselves and to also be able to share that message of hope to other people who have relapsed.
Yeah.
Because if you have relapsed during this pandemic, and Chris, I'm in the news.
Astronomical.
It's astronomical right now. People with long-term sobriety have relapsed. Okay. And my message to all of them is, dude, it's okay, man. It is okay. I don't think less of you.
Right.
And I know Chris doesn't think less of you. Just ask for help because we don't want you to die. Yeah. Like, that's just what I want to prevent. I don't want you to die. I want you to get back and get your life back together, because I know for me, a life of sobriety is a hell of a lot better than me chasing meth, where I can't even do simple tasks. Everything just seems like a Herculean effort when you're messed up in that world. Tell me what your life is like today.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was completely grateful even as that moment was happening. The media response was such that it went national. I
interviewed you too.
Yeah.
Remember, I actually met Chris when he relapsed. That was back in February, if I'm not correct. February of 2020. And I read the articles. I think it was actually the local articles that were written about you in your local hometown of Safford. But I was able to get your cell phone number from a mutual friend of ours, and we had never met. I didn't really know that you were an addict, to be quite honest with you, until I read that article. And I reached out to Chris because I knew he was at the VA hospital. And I just sent him a message saying, hey, man, my name is Brandon Lee. I'm a recovered addict. I'm not reaching out to you as a journalist. I'm just reaching out to you as somebody who I know I've walked in your shoes and I know what you're going through, and keep your head up and don't get down on yourself. We ended up keeping up the communication. You reached out to me, I think it was like in August or September of this year, saying that you had about 6 months under your belt, that you were ready to share your story. And it was something that I really personally wanted to do because I know how the national media can be sometimes. And I know reporters who don't have experience with addiction, how they can sometimes write stories about people who do relapse or people who are addicts. Yeah. And so I really wanted to be able to share your story from an empathetic and compassionate way, because I wanted the public to see that side of it. Yeah. Rather than the demonizing side that sometimes the media can truly play, and just prey on somebody's struggles.
Yeah. To my complete surprise, though, what ended up being the story nationally was that I came out with the blunt statement that I'm not going to hide from this. I'm not ashamed of what happened. I'm getting help. I'm resigning my position on the city council, on the fire department, and as a congressional candidate, and I'm going to take care of what I need to take care of. And what I found was that, all of those things that I had put on my plate, all of those good, positive things that I had worked for, there was always a second motive, and that was to be so busy and so engaged in good causes that I didn't have time to think about my traumas that I was suppressing, that I didn't process, and then compound all of the fire department trauma, all of the other traumas that I've spoke of today. It was always an attempt to outrun those. And then, so I am grateful that it ended in a very public fall and overdose, because that got me to where I needed to be. I was able to process all that trauma and still am. But more importantly, my wife and I have been able to do couples therapy and find out where our issues are. It was in our unhealthy communication and not being able to identify our feelings and talk about them. Rarely does my addiction come up ever at all in our therapy, because that's not the problem. The problem is the underlying trauma and the underlying issues that we have. And so the amount of personal growth and family growth and marriage growth that has happened this last year, I would not, if someone said you can go back to February, I would do the same exact thing. Yeah. I would relapse and I would overdose, because I would not be where I am today. And that's the honest truth.
Yeah.
And my wife has gotten to that point too, because when early on in my therapy, I said, a couple months down the road, you're going to feel the same way I feel, that this is a blessing. And she said, I don't know if I could ever get there, but I see but now she's like, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is was supposed to happen. This has happened for a reason. And you know what? I really could not care less about what people think of me. And what happened with that national story was that, wow, here's a politician that's not hiding this. This is odd. So it wasn't even like, oh, this Republican, it wasn't even that. Even CNN and MSNBC and New York Times were like, they would reach out to me in compassion and say, you know, and that's the part of me that the reason I left the Republican Party for good. I was always going to do that, but there was so many people on the progressive side that reached out and said, hey, you know, we see that you're a Trump supporter, which I wasn't. We can't support that, but you as a human being, you know, we care about you. And that was basically what Congressman O'Halloran did, and he helped me behind the scenes, and he's a great, decent man, and I'm happy that he won re-election, and he's reached out since then, and he's gonna come and we're gonna sit down and get together and to find some real meaningful reforms that can take place, so that these things don't happen to me. Because yes, the public side of this story is unique. The part that I was a congressional candidate is unique, but everything else is not unique.
No,
people are, you know, charged with criminal charges that are complete BS, that and they just fall through the cracks because they don't have a platform and a following to say, hey, this is ridiculous. And so that's my mission now. And I don't care who fights against me. That's the right thing to do. And I'm going to erase the stigma, and I'm going to bring hope and a message of hope to people, and also to shine a light on those travesties that happen to addicts, to regular people. You know, that just we need some real change in our criminal justice system, in our addiction recovery, the way we look at therapy. You know, there's a stigma even that exists that so-and-so is in couple therapy. Like, we need to erase all that, because I don't care if you have major issues or not. We are all struggling with something, and we can all benefit from therapy and getting just regular help, especially during this pandemic.
Yeah. Especially during it. And I go to trauma therapy, 2-hour trauma therapy once a week. And I tell everybody I'm in therapy. And as a matter of fact, I won't date somebody who doesn't go to therapy. Like, I just want you to always be super healthy up here in state of mind.
What's wrong with you that you're not in
therapy? Because nobody's life is perfect. And if you act like it is, you're just hiding a bunch of shit.
Right.
So this is, so Chris, thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing a bit of that story. You're going to come back on over the summertime, because Chris has a couple of big projects in the work. One, a TV show that's going to be really great about his own personal life and his family's life and what it's been like. But he's also going to be coming out with a book that he's currently working on. And so hopefully that book will be published in the summertime as well. So we'll have you back on to kind of talk about your book and what that process was like. But thank you again. I'm really proud of you.
Let me plug my podcast real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's called Come This Far with Chris Taylor. You can get it on any platform. And basically that's a short way of a motto, a mantra that my family's taken on, is that we didn't come this far to only come this far. And so it's a podcast much like yours. I try my hardest to stay away from the politics.
Yeah.
But some of it gets political. But mostly it's about sharing, hope and change and the human condition that we all are dealing with, and highlighting, my story and other people's stories that are inspirational, because we all can use inspiration and hope and just to erase the stigma.
I love it. That's my mission. Come This Far, the podcast with Chris Taylor, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, all the platforms where you can download this podcast as well. The more podcasts that are out there about addiction and recovery, the more we are going to smash the stigma around mental health. People like myself and Chris continue to have to speak up. We just have to. We don't have a choice. We have to. It is our purpose of living. So Chris, thank you, man. Thank you at home for watching or listening to this episode of Escaping Rock Bottom, the podcast. We'll see you back here for the next episode.